Friday marks the 71st anniversary of the end of the blockade of Leningrad, which was cut off by Hitler's army for nearly 900 days. In July 1941, German forces surrounded the city, trapping 2.5 million people in the city now known as St. Petersburg. The blockade resulted in the death of about 750,000 residents of the city, nearly 1 in 3 of the pre-war population. Author Caroline Walton has written a book about the siege of Leningrad, published late last year. Alice Lagnado spoke with her.
Caroline Walton has written a new book in which she interviews dozens of survivors of the siege of Leningrad. But it's not a straightforward book of testimony. The book also traces Caroline's own journey towards her own fate. It's a highly personal account of a search for understanding of both other people and of herself. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you first of all, the siege of Leningrad was a terrible episode in Russian history. What drew you to it as a writer?
Well, my first visit to Leningrad was in 1979 when I was a student here in London, and I went over for a week's visit, and I just remember our guide taking us to the Monument to Victory, and she started talking about the siege, and I can still picture that moment to this day, and I just had felt absolutely overwhelmed at what those people had suffered, and somehow I could identify with this more because this was a civilian tragedy, not a battlefield one. Somehow I thought, well, coming from London, it could have been us, and I just thought, how did anybody survive that? And later, when I had the chance in 1999 to go to St. Petersburg, I just really wanted to find out, that's all.
And what started your interest in Russia? You've obviously got a serious interest in the place. You've lived in a communal flat. You know the place better than a lot of people, and you know a Russia that for some people has gone now. What started off your interest in the country?
Literature. When I was a teenager, it was reading Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, later Solzhenitsyn, Chekhov, Turgenev, and so on. And I just thought, these books are amazing. I mean, these are the big questions of life. And what sort of country produced writers like these? So later on at university, I was studying Russian and Soviet history and politics to get a background. And then later on in my 20s, I started to learn the language because that was obviously necessary. And then when I had the chance, after the Soviet Union fell apart, I went to live in Samara on the Volga.
Why Samara?
Just because I happened to meet some people from Samara in London, and they put me in touch with their families and wrote me an invitation and facilitated the trip. But I really wanted to go to somewhere in the provinces to experience what the heart of Russia was like, because in a way, as London is not England, Moscow isn't Russia, so I wanted to go to a more typically Russian place, if you like.
And what kind of circumstances did you live in? I read you lived in a communal flat and you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did. There's a question in your voice. Yes, for a while I rented a private flat, and for a while I was in a communal flat, and it's the Russian dushevnost, the warmth, and I was taken care of so well by these elderly ladies who didn't have very much, but it was a wonderful experience.
So you decided to come back and write a book about the blockade. I'm still curious. There are so many subjects in Russia. This is one of the most terrible episodes in Russian history. Quite a difficult thing to tackle, and quite a sad thing to tackle. What was it that really drove you to write a book about this period rather than anything else, or something in the arts or culture?
Because it's exceptional in human existence. I mean, no city has ever suffered such losses as Leningrad did during the war, civilian losses. And yet half the city survived. It was the human interest and the lessons that I thought Leningrad has something that we, particularly in the West, can learn from. What there was in the spirit of those people that enabled them to transcend their physical circumstances. It was a turning point in my life personally. I've never forgotten those people. It seems as though they live with me all the time, because all of us in an individual, personal way, we come up against things in our lives, bereavement, illness, and so it's life. But I wanted to know really how those people had survived the unsurvivable, and that's a huge question.
So you were really trying to understand what people do when they're pushed to the extreme, how they manage, how they keep their dignity or don't. Was it traumatic talking to the survivors of the blockade?
Well, yes. I had nightmares and so on. Yes, sometimes I felt shattered. It was a very hot summer, but they would revive me. I would sometimes think, I've got to get on a tram and the heat and the crowds and see somebody else. But after 20 minutes with a blockadnik or blockadnitsa, I would feel revived by those people have something within them that's very, very rare and very, very powerful. And I felt that. They'd been through an experience which had obviously changed them for the rest of their lives, and they were actually eager to talk. Some people have asked me if it was hard to find people to talk to me, but quite the reverse. They seemed to be very eager to talk, to pass on what they'd received. Because you're quite right, in a situation like that, we become what we are. There's no hiding. Most of us go through life more or less putting on masks, but in different circumstances, and hoping we'll get away with it and nobody will see through us. In the siege, you could not. People, and that's why people divided. It seemed there were two extremes. There were those who just succumbed, whose spirit died before they died physically, and who started to hoard food or eat their food all at once. And sometimes people stole food from others. The worst, the most extreme actions were, of course, cannibalism. There was some. Some people took flesh from corpses. A few actually
to feed their children,
to feed themselves.
Yes,
it was an insanity. They called it moral dystrophy. Dystrophy is where the flesh withers away, and they said moral dystrophy was when the body consumes the conscience, if you like. So all the last shreds of humanity have disappeared. Some people said they could see it in their eyes of others. There's a man in my book who describes it very well. He says a friend of his starts to change and become greedy and alert and watchful. And this is a very distinguished, gentle, old elderly professor, but the man, Alexander Baldirev, the diarist who describes it, could see the man's personality change. So that was one terrible extreme. Some people went down that road, and others went down another road, which is what I was really interested in writing about, because that's what I think is what is so inspiring for all of us, because, unfortunately, tragic situations don't stop.
Those were the people who gave you energy when you talked to them and gave you inspiration. Did you find they were curious about why you were asking them these questions? Have these people been interviewed many times? I know there have been quite a lot of books about the blockade.
Yes. No, they weren't surprised. One lady who'd played oboe in Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, she opened the door to me and she was all made up and elegant, and she looked down the corridor of her block of flats and she said, "Where are the cameramen?" And I had to disappoint her because it was just me. But we had a wonderful afternoon, and she laid out tea and she read me her diary and talked, and we laughed. And no, they were so accepting.
I was particularly struck by the musicians, because I know that a lot of musicians and dancers were shipped away from the front during wartime in Russia, but clearly some remained in what was then Leningrad, and they played on using their last potato to starch their shirt for rehearsals. And I think you said that some of them had to go to rehearsals pulled in sleds because they were so weak.
That's right, yes. I believe it was the conductor, Karl Ilitch Eliasberg, who saved his last potato to starch his shirt. And yes, for personal reasons, not every musician or dancer left. Sometimes they didn't want to leave their families, and perhaps they just weren't asked. I don't know, but yes, there were quite a few left behind. And I focused on those people because they had incredible stories to tell about how their creativity transcended their physical conditions, and they would receive energy from their audience. Sometimes the audiences were too weak even to clap, and they just bowed instead. But one extraordinary story was a film actor, Ivan Dmitriev, who his little daughter was killed by a bomb, and on the way back from the cemetery he found a little abandoned boy in the street, and he decided to adopt the boy, but he didn't have a extra ration card to feed the child. So he went to his troupe of actors and said, look, can you give something? And each one of them gave 5 grams of sugar, a teaspoon of sugar, to that boy every week or whatever it was. And in doing so, it helped to save them. So they not only saved the boy, but they saved themselves, because the people who survived understood that it was those who gave who were more likely to survive, and it was the people who would grab their ration and run off into a dark corner and eat it all at once away from everybody else. Those people were more likely to die.
How fascinating. And terrible. It's
counterintuitive in a way. You think you just want to grab what you could, but actually those who survived understood that it was not about that. It was about giving and sharing, and also about using their own harnessing their own creativity to survive. And there were extraordinary stories in the book of people who, for example, the diarist, who actually sat and wrote, and he said he would visualize as he wrote. He felt, on the one hand, he'd felt death sucking him towards it like water, so he had to fight against that current, and he did that by writing his diary. And he said, as he wrote it, he knew it would be the most important thing that he'd ever write, and he could already feel himself in a warm room with light and food, and the siege is over. He harnessed the power of his imagination to transcend his actual circumstances.
Now, Caroline, your book is also about your own personal journey, isn't it? You've got Ivan, who keeps coming up throughout the book as someone who, I'm guessing as a reader, is someone who you were involved with in the past, and then right at the end, something fantastic happens, which is very Russian, very fateful. You open a door and you meet someone who later becomes your husband. Could you tell me a bit about this parallel story in the book?
Oh, right, yes. In the book, I have in my book, in the present day, I'm in St. Petersburg in 1999, but there are flashbacks to my time in Samara in 1993. And because the man I'd known there, Ivan, had been the son of a siege survivor, so I also wanted to show how the legacy of the siege lived on in the children of survivors and so on. And fate, yes. So after that was all over and that relationship ended, much later, many years later, I was in London, and yes, and then I this man literally turned up on my doorstep, and I started talking to him, saying that I'd lived in Russia, and it turned out that his grandmother had actually lived through the siege of Leningrad. So I thought there's some sort of fate there that really draws me towards the siege. And as I say, I've learnt it changed my life doing the research for this book, because those people will and their experiences will never leave me.
It seems quite brave to me that you revealed quite a lot of yourself through that parallel story, together with the bigger story of the siege in one book. But it also makes your book different from all the other more historical accounts or factual accounts of the siege that have come out in recent years. You wanted to do something different, not a straightforward book of testimony, didn't you?
Mm-hmm, I did, that's right, yes. Because there are some good books on straightforward histories on the siege, both in Russian and in English, of course. But I wanted to take it further and get behind the psychology of the siege. And the siege is a spiritual experience, if you like, to broaden it out and to make the siege relevant to us today, rather than reading about some foreign people a long time ago. No, this could be any of us today. And hopefully the stories of the survivors in my book will give people some inspiration and hope.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
Thank you.
That was Caroline Walton, whose book The Besieged, A Story of Survival is published by Biteback. This is Alice Lagnado for the Voice of Russia. Stay tuned.